You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
All right, this is Daniel Barrett, and I'm here with Chris Prefontaine from smartrealestatecoach.com. Chris, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. And I was looking through, like, you're basically, you have a lot of stuff going on, but you got a book and you've got all this stuff I'm really excited to dig into because, like, selfishly, I'm very curious about. But, I mentioned this before we got on the call. Like, I usually like to start just kind of getting a little bit of your origin story. How'd you get into real estate investing specifically? Because it's kind of a weird part of the world, right? So kind of an industry, if you don't know about it, it's kind of mysterious. So what was your into this whole kind of lifestyle?
A couple things. So I've been in real estate in some form or other since 91. So dating myself a little bit there, 29 plus years. But, post 2008, so post recession crash, whatever you want to call it, I called it the debacle.
Yeah.
I started kind of re-engineering things to be what we are today. But I mean, I've been at real estate since 91, so just kind of adapting with the markets, stay in it, but adapt with the markets is what we do.
Yeah. What were you doing in 91? Were you investing or did you get started in some other part of real estate?
Yeah, we were actually building homes. I didn't know anything about building. I hooked up with a builder. I would go tie up the land. We would pre-market a finished home. We would actually back then have all the subcontractors, including the landowner, wait until the house was pre-sold, sold, built, and cashed out, and then everybody got paid. I don't know if we get away with that now, but it worked then. The market was different.
Yeah, people were very patient at that point. That sounds nice.
Yeah, they wanted biz back then. It was tough.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. Well, if you brought up the term debacle, and it's actually one of the notes I took on the book. So let me just mention the book right now, and I want to make sure that I get the title right. It is called Real Estate on Your Terms by Mr. Chris Prefontaine. And in that book, you actually talk about like my 2008 debacle. And I highlighted the word debacle. One, because I was like, first of all, it's a sick word. We don't use that word enough.
Yeah.
And two, I'm really curious, like, what that means. Because it's like, one of the things I've talked about before in the shows, I've talked to a lot of really successful investors. And in my experience, some of the most successful people have a very transformative and almost kind of like traumatic 2008 story, right? So it's like, the story is like, there's sort of pre-2008, post-2008, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. So I'm always curious, like, kind of what your experience was during that time, because I feel like, I don't know, you could correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like people that went through that experience came out with a very specific set of lessons that maybe younger investors haven't quite internalized yet. So I'm curious, like, if you could explain a little bit about that term debacle and kind of what that whole time period meant.
Yeah, and you brought up some really cool things. That's why I'm scribbling some notes, and I'll try to hit a few of them because they were key. Yeah. You know what? Interesting. When I get off, I'm going to look up what the definition of that is. But to me, it's just a complete mess.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah,
good. I'll look it up and I'll use that. So you made me think about that. Okay, a couple things. To your later point, there's a lot of people. This was pre-COVID. I was saying this. There's a lot of people that haven't gone through cycles, one or more, or curveballs in their life, or both. And I think they're all important, especially if you're out trying to help people or that. You're trying to follow someone. That is super important. There's a lot of what I call new money since the debacle. Okay, it's good, but it hasn't been tested. I bet you it's being tested right now.
Yeah.
And so we'll soon find out. The cream rises. So for us, it was 22 or 23 properties or so, all bought conventionally. Like, I got to put 20% down or 30% down. I got to sign personally. All these things that people think is the norm. Like we go to RIAs with 200-300 people, and we have the head people going, look, I've been at this 30 years. I haven't heard of what you're doing. So it's not that it's new. It's just we've wrapped the system around it to kind of weather the storms. And this was, again, pre-chaos, what we're going through right now. So yeah, all the things we learned there were what we're doing now. Don't sign personally. Buy everything on terms, owner financing or lease purchase, like everything. And unless it's your own house, and you can even do that on terms. But if you can't find one, it's okay to sign for that, in my opinion. But other than that, do not, because when and if a storm comes again, and for some people, there's a storm right now, right? depending on what niche you're in.
Yeah.
For us, we're booming because it was engineered that way. But for a lot of people, there's a storm right now. So as I said, they're going to be tested. So I think I hit 2 or 3 of the things. You want to go back to any of those points from your high points?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's really fascinating to me. You mentioned people not having gone through cycles, right? And I think there's a real difference between intellectually and like sort of viscerally internalizing it.
Yeah.
And I say that like from personal experience because, I started my business in maybe like 2012, mid 2011 or so. And things have been really good for us and they continue to be good for us. Right. But it's a scary time for us now.
Right.
And I think a lot about like risk management on my own and for my family and stuff.
Right.
But it's different kind of going through however you want to categorize it, if you want to call it like a black swan event or some kind of really big cyclical event. And this whole time I've just been thinking about, it's so different going through it. And I think that coming out of it, I will have a profoundly different sort of set of expectations about what the future is going to hold. Right. So I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about that. Like, was it the fact that you went through 2008 that made you sort of approach real estate in a way, you talk about terms a lot. So maybe we can talk about that too, right? Approaching real estate in such a way where, yes, if everything's great, that's great, but you are deliberately hedging for maybe these kind of rare but extremely disruptive kind of periods in the economy.
Yeah. Okay. So deliberate is the word. So it was, do we even venture back into real estate again? And if we do, what would be the rules? That's kind of where my head was. And the rules were some of the things I mentioned: don't sign personally, buy on terms. Then it became a process. I don't want to say game, definitely a process where we started doing some deals in like 12. It took 4 years to dig out of the crap. So in 12, we started back very pointedly on terms and been laser focused since. So it's been 8 years and things have tweaked. How so? Well, we used to say, great, we'll do 2, 3, 4 year terms. Now we say, no, 5, 7, 10, because if you do 5, 7, 10-year terms, you care less about the market swings.
Yeah.
We've tweaked agreements and forms that we use with sellers and buyers to be more flexible and open communication. Hey, Dan, we're going to do this with your house. Look, I'm a conservative investor. And if I'm going to do something with your house, I'm going to put this in 7 years and that's our intent, but I can't control the national market. And so it's just very different communication now, very open and very cool way we structure the deals. And that's why right now, we're not just us in New England, because you're close to me geographically, but I'm talking all around North America, including into Canada. We have students just breaking records like 2 or 3 times the volume now. Why? Because banks are tightening up and everybody, and we're the answer right now for buyers and sellers.
Yeah. I want to draw attention to, I think, a thing you kind of said, and I think is so critical. And I think is one of the big lessons. This is like one of those things, right? Where it's like, you buy a Honda or whatever, and then you just see Honda everywhere. So it's like one of these things where it's like, I personally have been kind of learning this lesson and then to see it everywhere, which is that you set rules for your own level of risk tolerance. And then you built your business and systems around those rules. Rather than what I think people do is they look at what's a business and system that's really profitable, and my rules emerge from that, right?
Yeah.
So then it's not matched up to what is actually safe and appropriate for them. It's just like, what's going to make me the most money? I'm curious, like, did you have people, like when, things are really booming and things are amazing, did you have people be like, why are you doing it this way? You could make easier money doing it some other way that kind of doesn't match these kind of preset rules.
Similar, maybe not exact words, but like things like if I go back in time to 13-ish, people definitely said, you're nuts. Why are you buying? Like they still thought it was doom and gloom,
right?
Pretty much coming out of the doldrums. But those are, I just tend to go the opposite direction. Like if everybody's saying don't do it, like right now, go do it. It's the best time to do it. Everybody thinks it's not. So
well, that's one of my favorite all-time sayings is, if it sounds like a good idea, it's too late.
Yeah.
That's really true, man. It's really true.
Yeah, no question. And so it's not like that's a bad thing if you alluded to those people that made the rules that way. I did it all the way up till 2008. So sometimes you got to learn the hard way. I mean, when you get thrown at you the different, I call them storms, for me, it would be, let me go back, it would be the 90s. Then it would be, of course, 9/11. That threw a kink in everybody's business.
Right.
And then it was my son's accident in 2003. He was in a coma. I mean, that was like overnight, things changed.
Yeah.
And then it was, of course, the 2008. Well, that's 4 things without COVID. That's 5 now. That's a lot of curveballs.
It's a lot of things, right? It's, and I really do. I'm a fan of Nicholas Taleb, who wrote like Anti-Fragile and Fooled by Randomness, and like one of his kind of main hypotheses, right, is like it's like those kind of events are becoming more frequent because we live in such a globalized or interdependent kind of world. I think that's kind of fascinating. I did want to mention or sort of bring up your son's accident. So you write about this in your book, and I would really say it's like, I'll put this out there for people, the book is called Real Estate on Your Terms, right? I've read my share of real estate books, far less than many people who listen to this podcast. This is the only time I actually like teared up while reading a real estate book. I don't know about anybody else, but I found this chapter to be incredibly moving. And I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit of that story to people who aren't familiar, because it's sort of a really interesting view into how you and your family kind of dealt with this situation. And I don't know, I'm wondering if you could tell that story a little bit, because you just mentioned it.
Yeah. So I was literally on the way to my attorney's office to do a presentation. I remember like it was yesterday, and I was just getting off the exit, and I got the call from the school. He was just with his middle school going skiing, but he didn't have a helmet. It was one of those rotten days, like you don't go like rainy, icy, not a good day to do it. And he got off, of course, the young teenager got off and went off the highest jump, and then caught an edge on a snowboard, and then had multiple head injuries. They couldn't airlift him because it was too windy. So they had to intubate him on the spot, on the hill. And it would never have happened if by miracle, a guy wasn't sitting in an ambulance in the parking lot. I mean, it's just all these things.
Wow. Really? I missed that part. They're just literally just happened to be someone there.
There's like 3 in all of New England. You're from New England. There's like 3 in all of New England that know how to do that on the spot. And he was in the parking lot in the ambulance.
That is amazing.
Yeah, on duty.
That is amazing.
So that was fast forward a month in a coma. Kim and I were told, my wife and I were told he wouldn't walk, talk, or eat again on his own. Wow. And then, he runs the business with us now to fast forward. But of course, he had to go through therapy, flashcards, 1 + 1, 2 + 2, learn how to write with a different hand because one tremor. I mean, everything started totally from scratch.
Yeah, that is incredible.
Want to find motivated seller leads online, but don't know where to start? Download our free 2019 Motivated Seller Keyword Report today. AdWords nerds have spent over $5 million this year researching the most profitable keywords for finding motivated seller leads. And you can grab these exact keywords when you download our report at www.adwordsnerds.com/keywords.
One of the things I there's another kind of highlighting in the book. When you tell this story in the book, you sort of make this point of there's a point at which your son turns to your wife, I think, and says, am I ever going to walk again? This is after you guys have basically been told like, hey, this is never going to happen.
Yeah.
And your wife's reply is like, of course you are. Right. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you talk about that, because I'll be honest, like I go back and forth sometimes on things like this. Part of me is like, I try to think of myself as like highly rational, highly realistic person, right? So if someone tells me like, hey, you got a 99% chance of getting hit by lightning, like I'm not going to go outside, right? But at the same time, it's also pretty clear to me that when you're put in a really dire situation, right, having an almost unreasonable level of self-confidence is really key to getting through that situation. So it's like you are actually like in that situation, obviously not of your own choosing. So you talk about that. Like, did you guys have to like think about that, or was it just like that was the kind of mindset from the get-go?
A lot of it we talk about to this day. A lot of it was you're shell shocked, so you're just in the mode, right, with blinders on. And so I guess part of it wasn't conscious, but part of it was probably we're not going there. Like we don't want to believe that. And a lot of it we knew. Like you study this. I think you were alluding to this. You study this. You read it until you're doing it. You're not tested. And so in the hospital, when the doctors would come in and tell us things while he was in a coma, we'd say, please go in the hall. Like we're not talking because we thought he could hear, you just,
right. Mm-hmm.
It's all the subconscious stuff. So yeah, we just kicked into that mode. Like what's your option to wither? Like think about it. I never said that, but your option is do nothing or try everything you got. And so you probably saw in the book, I would post affirmations on his wall so that when he would come out, he would read it. We just did that nonstop. And so that's all he saw and knew, and just, I'm sure that helped.
Yeah. Well, you also alluded to this. This was another one of my notes that you guys are essentially a family business now. Correct me if I'm wrong. You got a lot of members of your family involved in the business. So as a father of 2 young sons, my kids are 4 and 6 right now.
They're being groomed for the business, right?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of. They like coming to my office, but it's because I have all this comic book crap in the background.
Yeah.
So it's like, but they're sort of, they're curious. And my youngest son will walk around and he calls his stuffed animals lovies. And so I'll be like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm working on the Lovey account. Like he says stuff like that. And I'm like, that's cool. But they have no idea what I do, right? I just sit in front of a computer. It could be it. So I'm always curious when people have family working together. So I'm curious, like, what was that decision-making process like? Was that something you always knew you wanted to do? And then like, how does it work in practice? Is that like easy for you guys or is it rocky? Or I'm just curious, like what the experience is actually.
Yeah. Okay. So I wish I could tell you I sat down, engineered a plan, had a goal, and it all worked. It's not the case. So what happened was when I started doing deals again, I was by myself in a hole in the wall. Literally, it was like a closet made into an office up the street.
Yeah.
So then Nick, my son, was sharing an office with me. It was kind of stage 2, but he was still a realtor. And then I started needing help. I'm like, geez, getting busy. Can you maybe help with the online stuff? I don't know how to do that stuff. Can you help? He said, yeah, I'll help. So that was like in 14. So it just started to grow organically where he's like, yeah, I like doing this. And I stayed with the sellers. And then Zach, my son-in-law, and my daughter Kayla were bartending at the time. Great money in Newport, Rhode Island, but not a good long-term plan.
Yeah.
So they came to me and said, hey, is there any room? And I just said, I don't know. Like, let's try it. Let's go per deal. There's no salary. Let's just go at it.
Right.
So slowly they gravitate into roles that they like doing. And to this day, nobody wants to cross over. It's kind of unique.
Wow.
But, yeah. So then as we grew, Dan, here's the key. We came up with values. When I say we, it wasn't me going, here's the deal. Here's what we're going to do for our company. It was, we voted on it. We came up with values, come up with a mission, come up with a purpose. So now the decisions that are made, the family piece doesn't get in the way. Does it fit the values or not? And so we weighed against that and the mission, the purpose. And if not, then there's no argument because you came up with them as a group. How can you say no? Like, this is the deal.
Right.
So yeah. I think that's good for any company, let alone a family company, but it certainly helps with the family company because like Zach, my son-in-law, is the COO now of the coaching company. Nick runs all the properties. So they're intricately involved in different areas. Yeah.
Well, I think it's fascinating that you guys, the way it worked for you was everyone kind of naturally gravitated towards the roles that they like, right? Which is such a huge deal. You think about like, you get a job somewhere and usually it's like, well, you started the job you hate and you got to kind of stick it out until you rise up to something that you like. That's fascinating to me. I think there's a ton of maybe sort of hidden advantages there that I don't even know about, but it just strikes me as, it could be so powerful. And I really like the values. What was your process for picking values? So here's another thing I'll be super honest about. Like, I love my team. I love my company. We're great. I have a document I made that's like, here's what the company's about, right? But I gotta be honest, when I made it, I was like, these kind of feel corny to me. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, there's sort of things I was like, we're here to do what's best for the client. And I'm like, I don't know. It just seems like we kind of all know that already. Like, it felt weird to write it down. So like, what was your process for like coming up with values that like you guys really resonate with? Because it sounds like you didn't just put it on the wall and forget about it. It sounds like you use it in your actual decision making.
Yeah. So once again, I wish I could tell you I brainchild this, but I didn't.
You could. Hey, look, you're the only one on the podcast. You can tell me whatever you want.
So here's how it happened with that. So every year we go, all right, I've always done this, but now as a group, what's in store for next year? Who do we need for mentors, coaches, groups, help? Is it lead gen? Is it scaling? What is it? In beginning of 17, we started to hit stride. The properties were always cranking, but we started to hit stride in the coaching. And so Zach would say, well, I'm going to work on this and, go better lead gen or funnels. And I said, you know what? I need to, as the owner, go look at how to scale this thing. Like, I never did it. I never went past like $1 million or $2 million. Never did it. So we found through different referrals, a group called Elite Entrepreneurs out in Arizona.
Okay.
And I will tell you, if they were on the podcast with us right now, I say the same thing. I owe everything to them for our scaling. Everything.
Wow.
Like, they brought me down to a meeting that they do, like a kickoff meeting. Like, you'd get down with you or your company with you for 2 days. And they help you establish all the values, the mission, the purpose. And then you go back to your team if you didn't bring them, and you, of course, fine-tune it and make it personal so they can decide. But that's what kicked it off. And I got to tell you, I felt the same way as you. That's why I'm telling that story. I was in the room going, the org chart, they drew like a future thing and a future this. And I'm going, all right. But I mean, I was just always by myself. So I'm like,
right,
this is kind of like weird. And then in 18, we had a record year. In 19, we had a record year. And 20, we're on track to kill it. And now we have, it was like a 10-year mission plan. So it was really cool to go through that process. And if you want to scale, if anyone wants to scale any business, this is not just real estate. I'm like the only real estate person in that group.
Yeah.
It's really, really unique. And now, of course, a lot of it's gone online with everything that's going on.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. I'm definitely going to look that up. And I'll grab a link for it. I'll put it in the show notes to the episode so people can find it, adwordsnerds.com/podcast. But That's really cool, man. I mean, I'm curious. So you mentioned you got this coaching side of your business now. Obviously, you got coaching yourself, right? I'm also a person that's had a number of really influential coaches in my life. I will say to people that want to go check out smartrealestatecoach.com, which is where Chris's stuff is at. He's got probably, I mean, I'll be honest, I'll throw this, having talked to many, many, many real estate investing coaches, I will throw the gauntlet down and say Chris is probably the best titled course I've ever seen, which is called 31 Day Billionaire, which, by the way, blows any other course I've ever seen out of the water in terms of pure title, right? It's just punching everyone in the face, which I appreciate it. But he's got a bunch of stuff up there that people can go check out. I'm curious, like, what you have learned through the coaching process specifically, because I found personally that coaching for me, like whenever I do any kind of coaching, I mean, like I am coaching someone else. It helps me to formulate my own thoughts in a way that are like, I probably wouldn't have done just on my own.
I agree.
And I usually come out of it being like, oh, I actually understand this like better now that I've had to teach it. So I'm curious, like what the move into coaching was like for you and kind of what you've gotten out of it personally.
Yeah. So I'll go to that second piece first. And that is, I couldn't agree more. Because now we actually have students who we're grooming to be coaches, and they're like, oh, this is why you do it. Like, it's so cool. Because yes, you got to be on your game. Like, I feel like an obligation to be like 2 steps ahead of my highest performer that I have in the entire North America, so that I can go, come on, and like, here's some new stuff.
Yeah.
Not shiny objects, just leadership, thought leadership stuff. And then as far as how I get into it, we're in Newport. I'm in Middletown now, but it's right next door. Yeah. And at the time, the War College is here, as you probably know. And one of the guys called me and said, look, I've seen your stuff around locally. I've been 3 tours to Afghanistan. I'm done with the service. I'm going to go back to civilian life. I'm moving to Oregon. Can you coach me? I said, okay. I mean, I used to coach realtors all over North America. I never coached investors yet. I said, sure. So we did like a preliminary thing. I mean, I couldn't do it anymore. He was in my office. We were hanging out, doing calls. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But that started the coaching. Then I wrote a little ebook. And that went to this person's list who has virtual assistants for real estate investors. She said, can you write something? I said, oh, try it. We wrote an ebook, a bunch of people opted in. And that list has grown now from 300 to 20,000 and millions of dollars in revenue. So we're on a mission to do deals, Dan, which is different. Because most people would say, we're on a mission to hit the sales number. We're on a mission to do deals with students. There's a set mission. So we don't do like masterminds just to raise revenue. We don't do any of that stuff. We do things that are going to do deals with students in the field, which is unique in the business.
Yeah. Well, I love it too. It's kind of like, I think the problem with some coaching and some kind of like online education stuff is usually it's like the dirty secret of that industry is like nobody finishes anything. So it's like 10% of people make it through the stuff that they buy.
And no support.
Yeah. It's like, it's kind of just a limitation of the medium in many ways, right? So I'm not calling anyone out specifically, but it's like, that's just kind of a known thing. But I think if you change the whole focus from, it's not about getting a certain number of students, not about hitting a certain revenue number, the metric, kind of like the lag indicator that you're going to care about is deals students do or deals done with students. That prevents you guys from focusing on anything that doesn't directly affect that bottom line, right? It's like, yeah. So I'm curious, like when you mentioned writing an ebook. You've got this book, right? You have another book too that you sent me, which is The New Rules of Real Estate Investing, which you wrote along with, it looks like your son, Nick, and Zach.
And Zach, yep.
Yeah. So do you consider yourself a writer at this point? You're like at least 2 books deep.
No, actually, we did a third with Monica Sawyer. It's a woman's real estate book. And then we got 2 in the process. It's more like a media thing for me. Like I was taught by the guy I mentioned to you before the show, Steven. He's my accountability partner now. And we hadn't met 3 years ago. He just became really good friends. And I'm going to introduce you to, but he's phenomenal at content. So he's like, well, I mean, you got how many podcast episodes, Chris? Over 100, whatever it is. So why don't you take your best blah, blah, blah and repurpose that and get some chapters out of a book? And I said, oh, that's interesting. And then why don't you take the video? So we just became like more of a media, provide free content for people. And some of those happen to be books. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I'm be totally honest. I'm deeply jealous because I've been trying to like lately, like not specifically in real estate, but just kind of as a hobby. I'm like, okay, I want to learn to be a better writer. I want to kind of hone that, sharpen the saw a little bit, right? So I've been writing just like an email newsletter every week, and it's like if anyone listening to this hasn't like sat down and like really tried to write a relatively long form thing, it's very difficult, right? So
yeah, it's tedious.
Yeah, I think that's super, super cool. And the stuff is all super high quality. So again, Joe, I know you said that people could get a free copy of the book. Let's pitch that right now, because we've been talking about. I'm sure people are going to be interested in it. How can people get a copy of some of your stuff?
Sure, I'll give you the link. We used to mail it. We're not quite back at the office yet, but you will still get the electronic, and one of them is an audio. But just go to free SRECbook.com and just say that you heard Dan and I on Dan's show. That's all you got to do.
All right, cool.
And when we are back to mailing, we don't make you put a credit card for shit. Like, we pay for shipping, everything. We get it to you, and they're hard copy books.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
But for now, it'll be electronic.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So free SREC.com. You can mention the show. I'll have a link on the show notes and everything, so people can go get a taste of the stuff that you put out. Which I've mentioned this before. People listen to the show a bunch, of like heard me interview a lot of people. I brought up kind of specific things from some of Chris's content because it's legit good. Like, it's real legitimately good.
I appreciate it.
So, yeah. So, all right. So it's about time for us to wrap it up. I don't want to keep you super, super long, but I do kind of want to circle back a little bit. I mean, we've talked a lot about a lot of things from your life, and a lot of things that you brought up about your approach to business are really interesting to me. And one of the things that's really kind of come across to me is that we were talking about how it's like, oh, you didn't mastermind like the values, you didn't mastermind this or whatever, but you seem very deliberate in terms of like the stuff that you do in business, right? You do it for a reason, right? Like you're saying, like, you started not signing, personally and doing things on terms because you had specific reasons in your past or certain levels of risk tolerance that was a good fit, right? Same thing with like working with your family. Same thing with like the way that you guys ended up structuring the business. And I'm just curious about, for you now, you're obviously in a very different place, coaching business doing real well, property business is booming. When you think about goals for the business now and where you want to take it, right? What is like the 10-year plan for what you guys are doing? And like, do you foresee having to have like a massive change in how you do things to get there? Or is it just, you're just going to keep working the system that you guys already have?
All right. So again, the latter point's really cool. I'll do that one first. Do we have to change to get there? 100% yes. I don't care what business you're in. If you're hearing this, I know this is an old adage, but what got you here is definitely not going to get you the next year if you want to grow. If you're quite content, don't get me wrong. I have some students that go, hey, Chris, you know what? The 2 or 3, 4 deal a month thing, I'm okay. If I do one every other month at these numbers, because they're very profitable, I'm good. Okay, so she doesn't have to like worry about changing much. Just pluck away. But if you're going to grow and you want to scale and or increase profitability, I think every year things change. That's why I remember earlier I said we think through, we go, what's going to be on the agenda this year for coaching? Because we've got to learn and grow. So we're all like, as part of what we call our big 3, the big goals for each trimester, we each pick a personal training or coaching program that we're going to do, or class for the admin staff, something to improve for next year, for sure. As far as where we're going, our mission right now was written in January of 18. That initial thing I went to, I said, and it brought us to 2022 to complete 1,500 transactions with our students. And then, of course, we brainstorm every trimester meeting, offsite meeting, where it's going in 10. But that's the next plateau, is the 2022 hitting 1,500 transactions.
That is super cool. I'm going to put something in my calendar and I'm going to email you like that day in 2022. And I'll be like, how'd it go? Awesome. I was like super curious. Or you could come back on the show. I would love to have you come back.
Yeah.
Chris Prefontaine, thank you so much for coming on. This was a really, really fascinating conversation for me. If you are listening to this, you want to check out Chris's stuff, I highly recommend that you do. smartrealestatecoach.com is the website. You can also get free stuff at freesrec.com.
Book.com.
Yeah, I'll have a bunch of stuff, links and stuff, adwordsnerds.com/podcast. You can find this episode and all our past episodes. Chris, thank you so much, man. This was a really, really fun and awesome conversation. So I appreciate it so much.
Fun chatting. Thanks, Dan.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.